Good evening, listeners, and thank you so much for joining me on this evening with Chia Use of Knowledge is Power. And tonight, our co-host, or shall I say my engineer, is not here tonight. Al, I hope you're feeling better. But in the studio, I have Jesse O tonight. So, Jesse, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I love working long hours.
Working long hours? You leave at 7 o'clock, right?
Yes.
So, after I'm done, and then you have, what, an hour left?
Half an hour.
A half an hour, so you can go home.
Yep.
Then, of course, everyone, my partner in crime. Hi, Paul.
Wait a minute. I don't even like the way you said that.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
That does not encourage confidence at all.
Oh, Paul.
The way did you see the way she's...
You don't need any more confidence in what you have. You're just...
That's true.
Yeah. You're on the borderline.
When you're as cute as I am,
I know.
it goes with the territory.
I know.
You just got to deal with it.
I know it. He just full of it.
Beyonce, we got a hard way to go.
Oh, my goodness. Tonight, listeners, if you're interested in our topic, which is going to be mental illness does not discriminate, what are the ways it can be managed? Please give us a call at 810-239-5733. Again, the number is 239-5733. Before I even introduce this guest, Paul, I want to tell you how I met this gentleman. And I think it was back in 2015. I was going through some emails. And I started a program for males, an after-school program, because there's not a lot of after-school preventive programs for young men.
Okay.
And so it was a partnership with Flagstar Bank and Chemical Bank, but we needed someone to do life coaching classes. And so it was one thing that a woman came up with the idea, but I was working with young men. So I only thought the best thing to do was to get a male in order to do life coaching with young men. So I called around because you don't have a lot of black males that are into social work type things. And so I ended up calling this one individual, and he referred me to one person. And I asked them if they would volunteer for me. And he said, free? I said, that's what volunteering is. So he said no. And so I don't know how I got this gentleman's phone number, but I contacted him. And I told him about the program and what I was trying to do.
Okay.
And he said yes.
Nice.
There was no such thing as when I said volunteer, does that mean free? Because some people don't understand that we do have to give back to society, to our youth, and those who are in need. And a lot of times when you're working in public service, you don't get compensated for what you do. And you don't know when you do things for people how the payback will come another way. So, Mr. Dexter Clarke, I want to tell you thank you for just that very beginning entry of meeting you, and you have been consistent. And that means so much to me, especially when I was getting started. So I had to be in business like 4 years by the time I contacted you. And to have people to volunteer to do things, it creates a partnership. So if you need something, call me, because I am indebted to what you have done. So I want to say thank you. So in the studio, I have Mr. Dexter Clarke, who has been employed by Genesee Health Systems for over 30 years. Mr. Clarke earned his Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Michigan. That's here in Flint. Dexter completed his professional development training on borderline personality disorders, stress management, and motivational interviewing techniques. You can help Paul when we get done tonight. Dexter regularly speaks on the subject as part of the Genesee Health System Speaker Bureau. So I want to tell you, welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, one thing, listeners, because I get confused with the names. So Genesee Health System used to be Community Mental Health. When did the name change?
Several years ago, what happened was that we started looking at our mission, and we realize that it's more than just mental health. It deals with the holistic approach, not only the mental part of a person's well-being, but also the physical part. So we felt by changing that name, it would encompass all of that, not only the mental aspect, but also the physical aspect as well.
The whole person as a whole. So tell me, what is mental illness and the different forms of mental illness?
Well, mental illness is a condition in which a person has difficulty with their moods and their feelings and their thoughts. To such a point where it becomes difficult for them to interact in society and their homes.
Okay.
The different types of mental illness, we have schizophrenia, we have bipolar, which is used to be called manic depression, and we have also the PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and we also have depression.
Okay.
And anxiety disorders as well.
Okay, so what are the most common forms of mental illness the residents may be experiencing here in Flint?
We see a lot of the schizophrenia and different forms of that. There's a schizoaffective disorder, which means you have the delusional thought contents, but also you may have some mood disorder going on with that, either mania or depression. And also we see the bipolar, you know, where you have either the mania or the depression.
Now, question, is any of this genetic?
Studies have shown that, especially when you look at the bipolar depression, that it does have it runs in families. You know, you do see that. With the schizophrenia, you know, studies have shown that it's a part of the brain that has difficulty with the firing of, transmitters and things of that nature. And once again, that can be also found in the families, hereditary.
In the families. Paul, at our Adult Learning Center, we do get some individuals that do have some of these mental illnesses. And what we do an intake process. And there's something called an Adult Learning Plan. And there's a section on the Adult Learning Plan that asks, do you have any mental illness? And so one of the questions that I ask them, do you have a doctor-documented illness? And when I say doctor documented, they normally say no. But when they do, I like to know exactly what is the disorder and if they're taking medication. But to backtrack is, we have some adults who do not know actually the name of their doctors. We have an emergency form that they have to complete. It surprises me that adults don't know who their primary care doctor is and they don't have a phone number. It's easy to find a number once you have a name, but some of these individuals don't have a clue as to what their doctor's names are. But when you're working with those with mental illness, I like to know exactly what the illness is and what is the medication that they're taking. Because I find that some of the students that we have don't take their medication like they're supposed to. And I like to know what types of triggers do they have, because that's one thing I don't want to do, is to trigger something and then I have a problem on my hands with the students. So prescription medication, with all these illnesses that you're stating, is prescription medication the thing that they're supposed to be taking? Or is this something holistic they can do?
Well, for the most part, we say that the prescription medication is what they should be taking, in addition to many times with some type of therapy treatment. Because, like I say, when you're dealing with, mood disorders, we're finding out that it's chemical imbalances. And the medication tries to get those chemicals back right. When I talked about schizophrenia, dealing with the brain and the firing of neuron transmitter synapses and things, once again, medication will help to slow the process down where people are not having delusional thoughts and things. When you're dealing with holistic medicine, you have to be very careful about that, just like you do with prescribed medication. But with holistic medication, they're natural and things, but it may not be enough to deal with the symptoms, or it may mask the symptoms, for a while.
What about marijuana? Because this seemed to be the talk right now about marijuana on our ballot for those who are 21 years of age and under. What about marijuana when it comes to these mental illnesses? Is it, I don't want to speak from a you being a doctor, a clinical perspective, but is there anything negative with marijuana with mental illnesses?
Well, marijuana has been approved to be used for some mental illnesses. As an agency, we don't see it being used for things like schizophrenia or bipolar, and there's a concern because, as you know, we're seeing a lot of mental illness with co-occurring disorder, which is substance use disorder. Okay. And many times, if you're using it to treat schizophrenia or bipolar, it could, lead to more substance use, from marijuana to other things, crack and, other drugs, which would make the symptoms even worse.
Okay. So a lot of the street drugs that these individuals are taking, does that trigger some of these mental illnesses as well?
Well, it can trigger, as we talked about earlier, that, a lot of it is genetics or hereditary. Okay. And, you're predisposed to having that mental illness. Most mental illnesses show up around the age of 14.
That's what I was going to ask.
And or around 24. Between that age, 14 to 24.
Okay.
And, the thought used to be that, if you take drugs, it's going to cause you to have mental illness. But many times it's a genetic disposition already. So, it may cause it to come a little faster or a little earlier, Now, like I said, some drugs like acid and things can cause some damage to the brain, which will cause you to have symptoms of mental illnesses. But most of the time, people that are going to have a form of mental illness, it will show itself, whether you use the drugs or not.
Okay. Mental illness has become a topic of discussion since being brought to the forefront of the national news. How can the average citizen help individuals with mental illness integrate back into society?
Well, I think the most important thing, and one thing that we do at Genesee Health System, is to try to educate the community on the forms of mental illness. Just like Red Cross has first aid classes that when to do first aid and CPR, we also have a first aid mental health class that people can sign up for. And basically, it does the same thing. It shows you the warning signs and show you what you can do to help a person until, they can be taken to, or a more professional person can assist them with that. So I think education is the most important thing, learning the symptoms. And I think a lot of times the media has done a disservice to people that suffer from mental illness because it shows it as being somebody that wants to go out and shoot. And I mean, we've had all these mass shootings and things, and not everyone, even though they try to make it sound like, has a form of mental illness. Sometimes it's just having issues on the job and anger issues and things of that nature. But not saying that, everyone that does mass shooting has mental illness. I would be careful in saying that. I've looked at some studies, and they say mainly probably since 1990 to 2017, 50% of those mass shootings had to do with somebody that had some type of mental illness diagnosis.
Only 50%. So the other ones was a conscious thought to do it.
Right.
Which, the question I have for you is, so let's say you say it's normally around the age of 14.
As early as 14 and as late as 24.
As late as 24. What if you're over the age of 24? Let me ask you this, what is the test that an individual take to determine if they have a form of mental illness?
Well, it's not really a test, but it's an assessment.
Okay.
And you need to be assessed by a mental health professional. We have an access department that takes information and sets you up to be, assessed by a social worker, but also by a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner. And there's just certain symptoms, certain signs, and also by taking a history, how long have you been feeling this way? Having these thoughts of, depression that goes beyond just being sad, but to the point where you no longer enjoy doing anything and you isolate yourself, or having thoughts of whether you think the television is talking to you, or thinking that, you're a billionaire and the bank has your money. So we get this information and we look at, how long has it been going on, and also, try to get a family history to see if there's been anyone else that has also had these same symptoms.
That's why it's so important, if your parents weren't married, for you to know both sides of your family, to know that medical history. I had a question, it kind of slipped my mind, but the legal system, that's what I want to talk about. The legal system and mental illness. You stated that there is a first aid mental health informational session or a class that you can take. What about police force? That we're noticing that police force have a tendency, I shouldn't say it that way. The media, again, when a lot of these people are being arrested, the older ones, not so much younger ones, are having mental illness type problems when they're arrested. What is the statistics of most people that's not what I say. What is the statistics of mental illness individuals being incarcerated and not being sent to an institution or somewhere in order to get the medical help?
Well, I don't have the exact numbers for that, but I will say that in Flint, we do have what we call a mental health court system that deals with that very problem. For years, we had people that were psychotic or suffering from mental illness that committed crimes, you know, and it was not due to intentional committing of those crimes, but due to their mental illness, they had decompensated and they were not mentally stable. So they were put into the general population with people that were not mental illness, and it caused even more, you know, issues with them. So now we have a mental health court system that anybody that is brought into the jail system for a crime, we have a social worker that goes down and she looks at the roster to see if there's any type of mental illness or if they've been in the system or if they're exhibiting symptoms. And then she does an assessment to see whether or not they would qualify for a mental health court.
Ah, okay. I do know that you have certain residents who are caretakers of individuals with mental illness, but yet they don't have the legal authority to do things. Is there any recommendation you can give listeners who may be in that situation, whereas they have a family member that has a mental illness, but they don't have any legal authority in order to do certain things with the individuals? What can you tell those listeners?
Well, you do have some authority in a sense. The criteria for someone that to be assessed for hospitalization, if they're a danger to themselves or others.
Okay.
If you have somebody that's threatening to kill you or threatening to harm you or harm themselves, then what you can do is what we call a petition. You do a petition and you go before a judge, and the judge will do what they call a pickup order. That petition is saying, I have seen behaviors that put this person at risk or will put them at risk in the near future or harm someone else. That goes before the judge. The judge will see this information, and if she sees that it is valid and you have a valid reason that they're going to hurt themselves or others, she will issue or he will issue a pickup order, which is an order to the police that will say that you can pick them up and take them to the hospital to be assessed. Now, it's not a guarantee that they're going to the hospital, but at least they will go into the hospital and be assessed by mental health professionals that will determine whether or not they need to go into the hospital.
But can that individual check themselves out of the hospital as well?
If they go in a petition, they cannot. They have to stay at least, 72 hours, to be evaluated.
Okay. But if you have an individual that supposed to be taking medication, but they're not taking their medication correctly, they're not a danger to themselves, but they have destructive behavior. Is there something else where they can go to the court and petition?
Well, we're now working on, it's called an AOT. It's a assistant outpatient treatment order, where it's saying even though they may not be a danger to themselves or others, but because they're not taking their medication, they're not seeing their therapist or case manager, that it is causing them to decompensate, that, they can be brought in and to be assessed to see whether or not they need to go into the hospital or be given some medication. And we're working out the logistics, because not only does it work with community mental health agency, but we work with the law enforcement and also with the judicial system. So all these coordinating agencies, in addition to the hospital, work together with this type of process.
Okay. Are there a lot of facilities outside of the hospital, but like residential facilities within Genesee County that residents can go to?
Yes.
Okay.
We do have foster care homes that they can go to, and that they are residents there. Okay.
Oh.
And also, we have consumers that can live independently. They live in apartments, they live in room and boards, and that's the one thing, once again, there's a stigma that just because you have a mental illness that you can't live by yourself, you can't work, you can't be gainfully employed, and that is a myth. That's no different than somebody that has high blood pressure or diabetes. mental illness is something that can be treated.
As long as they're taking their medication and going to therapy.
Correct.
Those are the good things for them to do. I want to go back on the first aid mental health sessions that you have. Can you tell us what does it incorporate? How long is the class? And who do you recommend taking that program?
Well, I would say, just like with first aid, anybody that wants to be aware and to be able to respond if they see a need should take the mental health first aid.
Okay.
And what it talks about is the signs and symptoms of the different mental illnesses, and also what you can do. Because sometimes, you know, you talked earlier about triggers. You know, sometimes you can say the wrong thing, or you may do something that may be a trigger to that individual, and that may be traumatic and cause them to act out even worse. So you don't want that.
Yes,
you know, and you want to be able to call, you know, whoever needs to come in to assist them and get them to a safe place, because it's all about keeping them safe and also keeping the community safe as well.
And this is open to the public in order to attend?
Yes, yes.
And when are they? Do you know offhand what the schedule is and when they're available?
Well, you can call our training department. It's area code 810-762-5280, and they can give you information on setting up those trainings.
Okay, because that really goes into my next question, because organizations now are being advised to take special training for evacuation, far as active shooter training. So you already answered it. Organizations should take a type of training like this in order to be able to identify and respond to a person with mental illness, because mental illness is not something that you just actually see, like you can see with some other illnesses. But let me go back to another question. Let's say if mental illness does run into your family, bipolar or either schizophrenia, and you said it's not picked up until they're around 14. What if the child is displaying some behaviors at an earlier age? Is it able to be detected at that age?
Yes, and we want to be careful because it could be so many other things. It may be some medical disorder that mimics, you know, a mental illness. So you want to make sure that, you know, the child is checked with their primary care physician to make sure that it's nothing medical that is giving those type of behaviors. But yes, we do have a children's program, Child and Family Services, that will also do assessments and things of that, because you want to be careful not to label a child with a diagnosis if that is not the diagnosis, because most of the time that will follow them for the rest of their life. And the same with adults, too. Adults, a lot of times they may not display certain symptoms until later in life, but it may be because they were able to mask it or hide it for so long. And then after a while, it carries out outside of the house, and it carries into their work and into their relationships and things of that nature.
What about video games? We do know that has now been listed as a, what do they call it, Paul? It's on a list now as a
addictive.
Yes. Can some of those video games trigger some type of illness, a mental illness in a child?
Well, I say maybe when you look at the level of violence and things of that nature, you know, children, and even sometimes we, you know, tend to mimic, you know, those type of things. That is not reality on TV, I mean, in the games, but then we think we can do the same thing in reality. So you're watching that all the time, and you start fixating on that, and then you say, well, what would happen if I go out and do that? So I can say indirectly that it could affect, I mean, not even a person with mental illness, but a regular person, you know, that is watching that. After you watch violence all the time, you may tend to start having that type of behaviors and that predisposition to, you know, to react the same way.
What about, because we talk a lot about mental illness, who do you find have more mental illness problems? Is it more veterans? Or is that the average citizen who experience more of your mental illness?
I don't think, and I think I looked at your topic, it doesn't matter whether you're, you know, rich or poor, it doesn't matter whether you're a vet or whatever. Mental illness, you know, can affect everyone, you know, and once again, it gets back to family history and whether or not there's a genetic disposition toward that. But like you say, definitely those that have gone into combat or dealt with traumatic events, you know, when you look at the 9/11 and things of that, hurricanes and things. People that have gone through that will cause them to have what we started dealing with, that anxiety disorder, you know. And
explain anxiety disorder. Can you give us a brief explanation of what is the anxiety disorder?
Well, basically, it's a disorder in which, you know, for whatever a trigger may be, you tend to get very anxious and overwhelmed and fearful. Your heart may start racing and beating more, and you just have this great fear. And it's beyond just being stage fright. Okay. But it gets to a point where you just kind of freeze and you don't want to, you know, do anything pretty much, you know. And so people suffer with that. And that's what we look at, you know, even with depression. When you get beyond just being sad, when you get to the point where you no longer have a like to do anything anymore, then, you know, that is an area of concern. You need to get it checked out by a mental health and a professional.
Seasonal disorder. I used to think I kind of suffer from that a little bit, and I ended up purchasing special lamps in order to help me. If that occurs on a regular basis, is that considered a form of mental illness?
Yes, that is a form of mental illness. We call it SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. And I think the DSM has a different name now. But basically, right, during certain periods of time, and they found out that, you know, when there's less sunlight and stuff, it affects people. So that's why they have the special lights and things that they say, you know, if you shine those type of things. And if you get yourself involved with activities. A lot of times people want to hibernate and not do anything, which can add to, you know, that depression, you know.
Yes. I do know a lot of people, when they retire, they don't get out as much and they don't do a lot. Could that contribute to some depression as well?
It could, you know, because then again you isolate yourself and you kind of get into that little cocoon and you start having a lack of interest in things. So you want to, you know, be involved and, you know, get out and meet people and talk to people. So that is always good to interact.
Okay. All righty. Paul, what do you have to say?
Give me a little mic here, Jason. Well, I have been avoiding cracking jokes.
Yeah, me too. This is a serious conversation, so I couldn't crack any jokes.
I wasn't diagnosed until last week.
Well, you know what? I always said that I probably had ADHD, and my grandmother beat it out of me.
Nice.
You know, because you know what? Older generation, and I want to go back to part of the generation that would probably be 90 years of age now. I would take it to 80 because some of her sisters are alive. This type of stuff wasn't known to them. So if you moved around too much, you're just being fidgety. You need to sit down, or you got disciplined for being fidgety. So you got spanked if you didn't. So I learned how to sit down and be still, but I still have like a burst of energy in me, and I'm just like to do things a lot. I do know that, do you find that a lot of individuals who experience mental illness, if they go back to when they were a child, were they ever in special ed? Is there a correlation there?
Were they ever in special ed?
Special ed classes.
Once again, like you say, when you're going back maybe 90s, or I mean, you know, people that are 90 or 60 years ago, that was not, you know, done. Like you said, you know, back then they just told you sit down, you're moving too much, you know. And I think we have to be careful, because nowadays people tend to be quickly to diagnose somebody as being that way, instead of saying it could be something else. It could be diet. It could be the home environment, instead of actually being an actual mental illness. You know, I think about relatives. I had a special aunt or somebody that was always a little different, and the family never talked about that. That could have been somebody dealing with mental illness at that time.
That is true. That is true. Paul, I'm sorry. I cut you off.
You got about 60 seconds left.
Oh, man.
To do what you got to do, and I'm not going to say anything. I there, but for the grace of God.
Yeah, I think it's an unspoken thing about mental illness. Again, to me, it's been more mainstream, a popular thing. And like you're saying, whenever there is a massive crime, the person suffered from a mental illness that wasn't diagnosed or detected. But like I said, I knew we weren't going to get done with this conversation, so I'm going to have you come back, because my time is totally out. So listeners, I want to say thank you so very much for joining me on tonight. And if you have any questions, please give us a phone call at 810-553-2140. And Paul, I'm doing the best that I can, because I know I have to go. Have a wonderful work week.